Well, thanks so much, Tom, for joining me today. Super excited we finally get to do this. Really excited about what you're building, your sort of journey in water. And obviously it's the resource of the world and of humanity. So obviously it's important we get this right. But before we get into sort of Bird Island Ventures and kind of what it is and its mission and vision, talk about your journey to get to that point to start the fund, just your journey and specifically in water, in your career path around water and how it took you to start the fund.
Yeah, for sure. And Grant, thanks so much for having me. It's really great to be here. Yes, yes, indeed. Water's pretty important stuff. Yeah, so it's been a kind of an interesting sort of circuitous route. I think a lot of people who end up in water sort of feel like water happened to them rather than them happening to water. You sort of get sucked into a whirlpool vortex and never find yourself getting out again. That's more a sort of reflection of it being a great place to spend time rather than not having any other options. So yeah, I mean, I chose sustainability like really quite consciously coming out of university in 2008. I was sort of pitched into the middle of the great financial crisis. Not hugely fun, but I sort of looked around at where would be a good place to sort of put my hopefully sort of 50-60 years of professional effort, and decided that the planet could probably use another hand. So I went off to go and join the amazing team at ERM, which is the largest pure sustainability consultancy, now owned by KKR, and really sort of learnt my kind of trade there, looking over all sorts of different things, everything from the EU emissions trading scheme to all of the work that you would do on a portfolio of investments around renewable energy, just really kind of advising a lot of clients on sustainability strategy and related business cases. But then in 2010, the great folks at the Carbon Disclosure Project, they wanted to do their first water disclosure report. A great guy called Marcus Norton there was looking for somebody to do it pro bono. I was the cheapest person in the building. So I was handed a USB with all of the data and strategies of 150 of the global 300. And we sort of wrote this report together, which we launched at Bloomberg in London. It was great. And that sort of turned me into a de facto kind of water sustainability guy. I spent a lot of time talking to other clients about, water sustainability strategy, how they should be thinking about it, value at stake, all of the risk issues that was going on. But obviously people were putting themselves back together after 2008, and it wasn't really the highest priority. So then business school and then two early stage companies, which were enormously instructive about kind of the process of company building, basically. But I was sort of rent an MBA, and just as useless as you would imagine, a rent like that I would have been in the context of two really quite impressive and aspirational early stage companies. And then really what brought me into water in a concentrated way was in 2015, the opportunity came up was to go and join Scott Bryan and the rest of the amazing team at Imagine H2O to kind of run programming, which basically put me with sort of prime responsibility over their accelerator program. So it's an accelerator exclusively for early stage water founders. It's the best in the business. Yeah. And so I just saw, over the following 5.5 years, we built this up one foot in front of the other. But after kind of 5.5 years, I'd seen about just under 3,000 early stage companies. Wow. I'd worked with 170 of the best founders in water from all over the world. And it was really clear that the degree of talent coming into this sector was increasing at a rate of knots. And really the capital wasn't keeping pace. And so I figured that, I at least had a shot at making the argument of building the fund I wish to see while I was running the accelerator. And mercifully, a fantastic group of LPs kind of agreed with the argument. And so we did a final close earlier this year. We've already put about sort of 55% of the fund to work. We've got 16 companies in the portfolio. And that kind of brings us up to where we are at the moment. We're just trying to build the seed fund of choice for the water sector, which is foundational, enormous, and growing, certainly in terms of talent coming in.
Well, let's just talk about like water for a second, just foundationally. Sure. I guess, what do people need to know about whether it's water health, water scarcity? I guess overall, and obviously these startups and founders are trying to solve different problems within water, but can you give us an overall theme of just the state of water now and sort of what are we looking at and what are founders trying to solve within just the water sector?
Absolutely. So this always kind of comes up like, so what do we mean by water? Do you mean kind of desalination, or is this kind of low flow faucets? And it's like, well, yeah, kind of. I mean, those are two things that we would look at. Really, the best way I think to describe this is that we're really looking at entrepreneurs and founders and that are looking to provide products and services that allow water and wastewater flows services to be delivered at the right quality, quantity, price, place, and time. Like that's really what we're about, because all five of those really need to be true for kind of a product to sing, but frankly for the sort of human interaction with water to kind of make sense. When you think about water deficiencies, one of those things is off. I mean, the obvious one being a flood, like you've got too much quantity there and usually the quality is off, etc. And then in terms of scarcity, obviously you don't have the quantity there, but often the lack of quantity is coupled with a lack of quality, but also it means that usually the price is off. So we're really trying to make sure that kind of the provision of water services, both water and wastewater, sort of stay in balance with what human requirements are. I think that the thing that's most often overlooked about water is the degree to which it is foundational to a whole bunch of different things, especially across kind of the impact space. Now, we're kind of we do not pitch ourselves as an impact investment firm. Now, we would have to go some not to have impact. Right. Like, I mean, in terms of what we're doing, like we expect by, 4 to 5 years time, when the companies that we've backed are really operating kind of at the degree of scale that we're expecting them to have some really quite impressive like impact numbers. But it's really, really important that we don't put the cart before the horse and say, really what we're trying to do is to solve half of the epochal problem that we have, which is 2.1 billion people without access to water quality and sanitation. That obviously is an enormously tragic problem, right? But it's actually not that helpful from the entrepreneurial perspective. What we're looking to do is to find these entrepreneurs that have the fundamental tenets of a business in place that just makes sense in the relatively immediate term, and then could put one foot in front of the other to build a resilient business that makes sense financially, because that is where the sustainability of impact comes from. Usually if you sort of put it the other way around, you're solving for the impact first, and maybe the financial sustainability is a bit more of a long shot. Right. And then, who cares what the impact is? And then on the water side of things, from the impact perspective, when you actually sort of look at it, water is pretty foundational to a whole bunch of other impact issues. Everything from healthcare, right? If you don't get the water right, sure, the rest of it is kind of like Band-Aid on a gunshot wound. It has to be right. I mean, for everything from dysentery to the behavioral issues downstream from lead poisoning, treating the symptoms is pointless if you don't get the lead out of the water. Gender equity, for example, in a variety of emerging markets, it's usually the job of the women of the household to secure the water supplies for that day or week. And obviously there's a one-to-one trade-off here. Is that all the time that you're spending carrying water, which is extremely heavy, by the way. Yeah. A meter cubed weighs a metric ton. So, that's time that's not spent in school or doing homework or, doing the other productive activities that should be done. And that's even before you get to the sanitation issues and kind of all the rest of it. So we really do mean it when we say that this is the fundamental molecule, not just because you have to like drink it every 2 to 3 days, otherwise you die. And that actually is the predicate of us being able to produce food. It's really foundational to a whole bunch of other issues that really lie at the heart of human beings being able to like self-actuate in the way that we want every human on the planet to do. So, I mean, I'll just pause there before I get to the state of water now. I hope all of that makes sense.
Well, because I think there's wherever you live, like in the world, your relationship with water might be pretty different, right? If you go to some places, you can't drink the faucet water, for example. Yep. Right. If you go to, another place, it's fine. People in emerging markets have a different relationship with water. Like you said, you have to go get it, carry it back. It might not even be clean. It might be a process. Some markets you can drink tap water and it's fine. It's safe. Do you see startups trying to solve for both issues with water in sort of the developed world and then issues for water in the emerging markets? Do you see companies trying to solve on both of those lenses? Because obviously it's all connected in some way or another, right? But I guess getting that 2.1 billion, right, to have sort of safe drinking water is great for the global economy, and sort of impact is what it is. But it's also the fact that people can be productive. They can, live their dreams out, start companies themselves if they want. But like you said, it takes a lot of time just to like survive trying to get water, right? There's a lot of different things you can't do.
Yes.
My question is how do you solve for, water, but you're also dealing with kind of two different worlds and how they interact with water?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's something that we kind of keep an eye on. And this is where it's really important that we keep an eye on the ball in terms of our own. I mean, this is the sort of Berkshire Hathaway idea, but circles of competence.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what is it that I am? I mean, it all sounds ridiculous, especially as a British person. Self-aggrandizement isn't my favorite thing. But, like, what is it that, like, I've got an edge on? Like,
Mm-hmm.
what do I understand better than sort of most other people? And it's really important that, especially early, and we're a startup fund.
Yep.
It's really important that we stay out of trouble. And one of the ways in which you can get into trouble is to march off into operating context that you do not understand.
Right.
We see this all the time, actually, just in water generally, which is really, really smart people who have done awfully well in lots of other areas come marching into water with a thesis because they see extremely large numbers, and they see really big markets, and they see all the, this foundational aspect, and that water's getting more scarce and all the rest of it. And then they get into trouble because they don't appreciate the nuances. They sort of end up putting capital in slightly head scratchy places. For people who have been in this for a while and sort of understand where the landmines are buried. So the same thing applies to, I think, certainly this kind of the emerging market investing. Now, I've spent sort of a reasonable amount of time in and around companies who are doing amazing work in emerging markets, whether that's in sub-Saharan Africa or South Asia or Southeast Asia or where it might be.
Yeah, building what, like specifically in those regions, just like filtration systems or just
I mean, it's everything from filtration systems to really elegant non-mechanical chlorine dosing systems to the infrastructure that you need to put around wells to make sure that they are not only put in, but then maintained.
Right.
This is, active sanitation processing. So, human waste to get it into, spreadable fertilizer and then biogas. A huge amount of work being done on everything from water access to sanitation to measurement to quality assurance, quality monitoring. Like, there's a massive amount of work that's being done. The issue that we run into most often, and sounds terrible, is that I have quite a specific job. My job is to respect the reason why my LPs came to me. And, part of what they want absolutely is the impact, for sure. But they're also looking for things that make sense and make sense with a margin of safety on a financial basis. And it's quite difficult to hold up businesses that are operating against businesses, say in, for example, I don't know, we'll probably talk about them later, but Zwitterco in Boston, that just has a much higher likelihood of being able to have a higher gross yield of cash towards the fund and for my LPs, which is the reason why they're here, than it is for a company that has, the unit economics just aren't as strong on a gross basis, and they aren't as strong on a marginal basis usually. But the great thing is that we are seeing this changing. We saw 3 companies in India, and I just saw 2 companies in sub-Saharan Africa that were almost there. But the reason we had to say no was not actually because of the structure of the unit economics or of the founders themselves. It's because our inability to underwrite that operating environment. Like, I don't know what I don't know about what's going on out there. And as a steward of my client's capital, it's really, really important that I don't just sort of wander off into an operating environment that I don't understand before we as a fund are specifically set up to be able to make those bets. Now, at some point, does it make sense for BIV to have an office in, let's call it, it could be Nairobi or Cape Town, maybe Paris or London, that would be able to do the EMEA region. Would it make sense for us to have an operation in Mumbai and Singapore, or Singapore first, to be able to do Southeast Asia and South Asia? Absolutely, the answer is yes. But at the moment, I'm kind of a dude sitting in an IKEA chair, and it's probably, God knows whatever it's happening to my mum, if she listens to this, is probably like, why don't you get a good chair? I'm just a dude sitting in an IKEA chair in Brooklyn, and I spent my last 8 years in San Francisco. And like, the road of bad investments is littered with people who sort of sit in chairs in San Francisco and think that they really do understand the operating environment in Mali and Somaliland and South Sudan, Indonesia. It's really important we stay humble. And so we want to get there. And we think that the caliber of business models is coming up. We think that the cost structures are changing. We think that all of the things are aligning. But at the moment, we spend more time in US, Canada, Europe, because this is just a place where we have a margin of safety. And it annoys me. It annoys me, but it really is. It's the way in which you do good risk-adjusted investing, which is our job for the moment. And we're going to set ourselves up in the future to be able to take on those kind of companies that we all know that we need.
We talk about US, Canada, Europe. What are some of the water problems that those regions face? And what is sort of being solved for there? What are some of the issues?
Strap in, Grant. How long have
I'm ready. I'm in my
how long have you got?
chair that is it's like a foldable chair. It's probably worse than the chair you have, actually.
Well, if you get uncomfortable, just let me know.
I'm ready.
Uncomfortable/bored. Okay, so I mean, it's the first thing to say. I mean, I'll start in the US. The first thing to say is that the Feds haven't put any money really into, or at least the federal support for water fell off a cliff at the end of the 70s and has never recovered. And when you sort of look at the design of pretty much all water infrastructure, it's designed to a 40-year useful life. And that means that a huge proportion of the infrastructure is aged out, basically. Or a lot of the problems that you're seeing in everything from, I mean, just we had 1.5 inches of rain in New York the day before yesterday, and the pictures of the water falling into subway stations is to be seen to be believed. As somebody who is very proud of the London Underground, I'm even more proud of them now. No shade. This is happening all over the country, and this manifests itself in everything from leakage rates to quality problems to issues around budgets to, you know, it's just huge issues all over the place, just in terms of the physical infrastructure required to treat, move to the end user, whether it's a consumer or industrial, and then do that in reverse. So take the water back from its use, move it back to where it's treated, and then the cycle can either begin again, either by discharge to the environment or through reuse. And so that's kind of the first one. The second thing that is really playing on our mind at the moment, because it speaks to this idea of resilience, is actually very oddly a personnel issue. So the demographics of the water sector are very, very top heavy, just in terms of age. It's also very heavily male and very heavily white, which is, you know, has its own set of kind of downstream issues, which are really being worked on to the credit of the sector, but it still remains very true. But demographically, we refer to it as the silver tsunami, which is the coming wave of retirements of people who work within these systems. And the problem is that when people walk out of those jobs to go and play golf in Tampa or whatever, is that the expertise required to run these systems, which are best thought of not as machines, but as organisms, that walks out of the door with them. And we are not talking about sophisticated sort of, you know, software, like non-contemporaneous remote work where everything is documented in Notion or whatever it is. And so it's quite easy to come and slot in. Right. Like a lot of these systems, because you're talking about kind of 148,000 water and wastewater systems in the US alone. A lot of these things are literally like managed on pieces of paper, post-it notes, and kind of a 1997 Dell PC. And like no shade. Yeah, that is a reflection not of the expertise of the people who are running those systems. They are extraordinarily dedicated, really, really smart professionals. It's a reflection of the resources that they're working with. So that's a second one. A third one, I would say, this is a long list, but this is the stuff that's like way up the top of our concern list is water quality issues. You know, whether you're sort of, you know, communities in the northern Central Valley that are dealing with everything from, you know, arsenic to 1,2,3 TCP, and then you move over to the rural communities of the Northeast and the Midwest that are just starting to wake up to with what the concentration of PFAS and PFAS are the perfluoroalkyl substances. They're basically the active ingredients in things like Teflon, extraordinarily good at rejecting you know, water and oils and grease and all the rest of it, but also incredibly hard to break down, and as it turns out, enormously toxic. It's not an understatement to say that we have poisoned the world, and it's starting to be a more visible story, but we're only just at the tip of the iceberg of understanding what the ramifications of PFAS are for the communities that obviously rely on highly contaminated water sources. We're just starting to see this play out. And so those are kind of 1, 2, and 3. And then if you're looking at Europe, I mean, it's sort of similar stuff, but you're looking at everything from leakage rates to flood control to the availability of water for industrial processes. If you're looking at what's happening in the Rhine, we're at 14.7 inches from the Rhine being impassable for, you know, things like food shipments to the middle of Europe. You know, this is not good stuff. And then you've got, I mean, frankly, fire suppression, right? I mean, if you saw the pictures yesterday of a section of London that got wiped out by wildfire in Wallingford, I believe it was, this is crazy. It really is. It's nuts. And then you kind of, so everywhere you look within water, there are things to be worked on by smart entrepreneurs, right? What you're looking at is, when we calculated it last year, you were looking at a $900 billion market growing by about 6% a year. And so we're closing in on the $1 trillion market. That's both in the kind of CapEx and OpEx spend, just in sort of water and wastewater services worldwide. So it is an enormous market, and none of it, like, let's put it this way, no one's talking about the metaverse in water. There's a lot of help that's needed to make this resilient. And I'll just pause for a second, but like, the last thing I'll say is that everything that we are seeing is being magnified by climate change. For example, the Salt Lake next to Salt Lake City is drying up at kind of a rate of knots. And what is being exposed is arsenic dust. And so you get the wrong wind at the wrong speed, at the wrong direction. And what the good citizens of Salt Lake City, which is one of the fastest growing cities in America, what you get is arsenic dust clouds being layered over those communities. This is like the depth to which this rabbit hole goes in water is constantly surprising, even to me, who only does this.
Right.
And so when you're talking about climate change, it's just a magnifier. And whether you say climate change is water change, or if climate change is the shark, water is its teeth, or the tip of the spear, pick your metaphor. Water is the way in which we steward water is the fundamental predicate of whether or not we successfully deal with whatever climate change we baked into our future. And judging by what's happening at the moment, we've already baked in a good deal of climate change into our future, and it sucks. But the way in which we deal with it is predicated on how we deal with water. And we're only just at the beginning of like widespread public understanding that is actually the case. There's
so many questions I want to ask.
It's a lot. Yeah.
I think the one, just because I think it was known to, specifically if you live in the US, but also I think, globally it probably reached a little bit, but sort of what happened in Flint, Michigan.
Yeah.
Was that sort of an anomaly, or is that happening in other places and it just hasn't got to that level yet, but it might happen? And was that, just like you said, was it kind of a perfect storm of sophisticated individuals retiring out of that, lack of investment in infrastructure, and it was kind of this perfect storm to have that happen? Or was it something that was solvable through, companies that you're funding now, right? Through sort of technology that enables, these cities to do this stuff more reasonable, maybe not at an affordable rate, but is it the fact that there's a lack of a way to actually upgrade the infrastructure, right?
Yeah.
Is that an issue as well? But I guess when you heard when stuff with Flint happened,
yeah,
I guess, like, what was your first response? And you're like, oh, I saw that coming, right? Or was it still a shock, or you're like, yeah, this is inevitable?
Yeah, no, no one saw it coming. I mean, you've got to assume kind of best intentions on the behalf of the people who were sort of responsible for the decision. I mean, really, they were put in a situation where the budget was in such a mess that they saw an opportunity to save a large amount of money. Hopefully, what we learned from this is that let's make sure that anything to do with drinking water is down the bottom of the list.
That's an untouchable budget mark, right?
That you do not mess with it. And actually, it's one of the things that we look for. Like, if we're going to be investing in things in that are in and around water quality that touch the provision of clean water, there has to be a margin of safety a mile wide on the performance of it, because you do not mess with this stuff unless you absolutely have to. But the Flint issue was just an enormous tragedy born of, kind of chemistry, right? In that when they changed their water supply, the difference in pH and the chemical makeup of the water that was coming in interacted with the pipes to essentially leach lead that had been basically in kind of basically steady state. I mean, not great, and certainly there was water in this lead in the water supply before that, and obviously the lead pipes were there, but the change in the chemistry was what dumped a whole bunch of lead into that water, which then obviously got into the bloodstreams of the people in there. So in that sense, you don't get that many people changing their kind of overall water supply. That doesn't happen every day. It doesn't happen every 2 weeks, right? And so, and then the political decisions leading up to that, and the tightness of the budget, and all the rest of it. Yeah, to some extent, Flint was absolutely a perfect storm. But I think that there are things that are absolutely generalizable about Flint that really need to be borne in mind. And it's not that, everywhere has like very, very high concentrations of lead. Now,
sure.
Is there a massive lead problem in the US that needs to be fixed? And are there some really smart people like, Megan Glover and Tony Ryan at 120 Water that are doing extraordinary things to be able to go through what actually happens, which needs to be the physical replacement of lead? People get kind of very excited about, being able to use AI and machine learning to kind of, identify 85% of the lead pipes. Yeah, well, okay, thank you. But actually what you need is direct observation of what is coming out of the tap, and what you need is replacement of this actual conduit. And so, Flint was a tragedy that has, very, very unfortunately served to like highlight this issue that is kind of ubiquitous. The second thing that is ubiquitous is that, is the underfunding of water and wastewater services. Right. Finally, through the infrastructure bill, you're starting to see at least a partial reawakening of federal support for this. And then it was Arizona, I believe, that's just made available another 1.2 billion in kind of water and wastewater related funding. Water was actually the thing that was most resilient in the infrastructure bill. It was the thing that was cut least after it kind of, got slightly shredded by Congress, as is always to happen with as always happens with these bills. It's one of these extraordinary things that it's actually one of the last things that is bipartisan is in water in America's slightly depressing political setup. All of this is wildly underfunded relative to, on an absolute basis, but
relative to the metaverse.
But definitely relative to the metaverse. Yeah, exactly. This is the problem when you slightly kind of remove the at least in the part of public utilities, you remove the profit motive from the development of water and wastewater services. Anyway, that's a whole rabbit hole we can go down. Yep. But they are just wildly underfunded, especially relative to their utility to society, which is that this is absolute. And I mean that very, very literally. Like, if you take this away, like if you don't supply water at the right quality, quantity, price, place, and time, the downstream
the metaverse doesn't happen.
Right? Totally, exactly. One of the things, this is a tangent, right? But when I watched Ready Player One, I was like, you know what? That looks depressing. But like, these people still need to drink. They still need to wash. They still need to the water industry is going to be just fine. Thank you very much. No matter what depressing future future corner we kind of paint ourselves into. This is one of the reasons why I think it's actually a good place to be investing, because like I can't really see a future in which like water is going to become kind of less important. Right. And the dynamics are going to be any less favorable of, everything from infrastructure renewal to, people being more aware of the issue and being, willing and able to pay for solutions that, improve their access to water and wastewater services. Anyway, but just to go back to kind of the Flint issue and what we kind of learned from it is that we really need to make sure, and what's depressing in that it's still going on in terms of the response to the Flint issue. Gradually things have got, marginally better, but it's not like the world, it's not like either the state or the Michigan state or federal government jumped on this issue and said never again. Right. 7 years on, we still don't really have a kind of full solution to it. And then the other thing that comes out of it, the last thing I'll mention is the predilection for Band-Aids. And so, of course, people just need water then and there. But the response is the provision of, water in single-use plastic bottles, which is fine. And, thank you very much to all of those corporates that quote unquote stood up and, and provided those bottles. It's tempting to think about whether or not they were interested in building a consumer base of reliable consumers for after they stopped giving them away. But I don't want to be too cynical. Really what you see time and again, and it's amazing the degree to which this actually pops up, is that things go wrong with water and then people put a Band-Aid on it rather than solving the source issue, partially because the source issue is so expensive, especially in the context of centralized infrastructure. One of the really, really interesting themes that we're seeing is finally we're seeing the rise in decentralized infrastructure. Now that's going to take a long time to manifest itself, but it's going to be tremendously important when we get there. And included in decentralized infrastructure, which is, up to and including the household level of water treatment treatment, but also water recycling. It's particularly important at the industrial level, but we'll also see a takeoff in grey water and what's referred to as black water, which is basically fecally contaminated water. That water being used round and around in the same building, the same system, sometimes the same household. It's going to be a long road, but that's absolutely where the world is going.
Great. That's great to hear. Let's get into a little bit of the portfolio, because we kind of talked about the breadth of of issues and problems. What are some of the startups that you're excited about, and what are they doing? What are their missions and visions?
Yeah, sure. Well, the first thing I always want to say about the portfolio is that I kind of hate that word.
Okay.
I feel like artists have portfolios and architects have portolios. And
what shall we call it?
No, and I don't mean no shade, man. This is it's what everybody refers to it, but I think it implies a kind of a degree of creation on the part of venture funds, which is entirely unwarranted. Like the people who are creators are the founders. We are very, very lucky to be a very small part and hopefully a useful partner in the creation of these companies. But I always think it's worth kind of mentioning that they are front and center. It's an unimaginably hard job starting a company, and we obviously salute them. So we've got 16 companies in at the moment, and they cover a lot of ground. Everything from atmospheric water generation. The guys at Spout, Ruben and Tyler at Spout, have built an extraordinary unit on only $200,000, and we saw at least one other company spend $17 million failing to build what these guys did on $200,000, which is a countertop atmospheric water generation unit. They draw about 1 gallon to 1.5 gallons a day out of the air, which essentially serves the drinking water needs of a family of four. I mean,
is it a consumer product?
It's a consumer product. It's a consumer product, and and they're starting at the top end. It's very much the kind of Tesla logic of you build the Roadster, and then you build the Model S, and then you sort of move towards the X and the 3, and and then you come down the cost curve and maintain your margins and bring the price down over time. Absolutely, that's what's going to happen. They're very, very sensible company builders, but it's an extraordinary potential intervention, because if you can take care of the drinking water requirements of people over and above, I mean, it's operational above 25% humidity, but anywhere above 50% you're like golden, which takes care of a very, very large proportion of the world's population. Like what you have is kind of an insurance policy on a household basis for at least drinking water access, and it's tremendously exciting because it's very easy for them to size up, but it's really not very easy for other technologies to size down. So that's kind of one example. And then we touched on reuse, and so I'll mention Zwitico. Alex and I have been working together. Alex Rappaport, the CEO, have been working together since 2018. He's a preternaturally talented company builder. They've got a very exciting announcement coming up shortly. But really, like when you think about filtration, when you think about water treatment, the active element of industrial, it's not just industrial, it's also municipal water treatment, is usually the kind of the reverse osmosis membrane. But just think about the membrane, basically. That's the thing that's a filter. It's basically a very thin sheet through which water is pushed, which takes out the nasties. That's the best way to understand a membrane. And usually the process of pushing water through to take out the nasties means that the membrane itself gets all gunked up and into a big mess, and the chemistry changes, and the rate at which you can push water through it just gets lower and lower until you have to replace that membrane. That's great business for the people who make that membrane. It is terrible business for the people who have to use that membrane, because ideally what you would need is a membrane that lasts as long as possible. That's important for like reducing replacement costs, but it's also really important for uptime. So every time that you need to clean a membrane, you basically need to shut down whatever industrial process you're doing, but you also need to put water treatment facilities of all kinds kind of on pause, which sucks, because cleaning happens all the time, anywhere between every 45 to 90 minutes. What Zwitico has made is a membrane that appears, I mean, we don't want to say not to foul, which is like not to get any worse under kind of the conditions of their initial deployment, but it's maintaining performance for an alarmingly long time. And this means that they are going to be able to really fundamentally alter the economics of a whole bunch of things in water treatment, which means that more people are going to invest in water treatment, which is good news for everything from surface water flows to utilities that are having problems with water that's coming back down the sewer with far too high concentrations of, the kind of nasties that would be able to be taken out by a filtration system that Zwitterco enables. But it also has the Uber effect. You remember that was there was this famous study of Uber where the estimation of Uber's market size was, it was the size of the taxi market minus kind of 10% because none of the taxis would kind of move over. And actually, it turns out they underestimated the size of the market by an order of magnitude, if not 2 orders of magnitude, because Uber created its own demand because cost structure and the experience and the convenience was so different. A lot of people moved into, taking rides where they wouldn't otherwise. The logic is exactly the same in water treatment, in that people who literally would not be able to treat what they're doing, you're talking about really hardcore dairy waste streams, for example. Now you suddenly have an ability to filter this water on site and then put the water back into your operations. And it is a tremendously significant leap forward. And if they're right, and if they can make it work, and it already is working, we are talking about hundreds of billions of potential gallons of water reuse. You're just talking about water molecules going round and round and round the same processes, which just alleviates the pressure on all of the systems. And that's even before you get to monetizable and reusable stuff that is isolated by Zwitterco systems. And then just to sort of give you another idea of how far we're going, we just moved to Brooklyn, and so up the road is Bessie Schwartz and Beth Tellman, who are at the helm of Cloud to Street, which is super awesome company. Again, they've just had an amazing announcement alongside Munich Re and I believe a company called Rainbow. They've been able to provide what's called parametric insurance. So it's insurance according to parameters. So basically from space, you can understand whether, XYZ farmer in Colombia has had a flood destroy his or her crop.
Right.
You can tell that from space now. You need to be alarmingly good at hydrology and a variety of other data integration things, which both Beth and Bessie are. That is a really huge potential deal. That is a really huge deal that is live now. And really what Cloud to Street are going to be able to do is to do that for the world. They're going to be able to underpin parametric insurance for everyone from homeowners to warehouse operators to train and road operators to canals to everybody that needs insurance because of either too much or lack of water. Cloud to Street has got a massive advantage in the accuracy of the appraisal of flood and soon to be drought impacts as well. And they're such a fascinating case because they really answer a really important question about Earth observation, which is kind of, so what? There was an extraordinary amount of stuff happening in Earth observation. I mean, obviously, Starlink, not Starlink. It's the, the constellations of microsatellites and CubeSats. And, the improvements in imagery. There's an amazing company called Albedo Space, which is run by an extraordinary entrepreneur called Topher. Oh my God, he's going to kill me. Sorry, Topher Haddad. Anyway, they're extraordinary. They're going to be the first on the market with 10 centimeter resolution, which is absolutely amazing. I mean, you're really going to be able to read road signs from space. But with a lot of this stuff, the question is so what? Right. If we have all of this data and we have all of this imagery, how do you actually make it useful in terms of, products and solutions that make a meaningful difference in the industries of today? And Cloud to Street are just a really, really fantastic answer to that. And when you look at the potential consequences of parametric insurance and the rest of the stuff that they do, so they are the UN's flood monitoring partner. They have the sort of most advanced database of, they were just on the cover of Nature, I think in October, I believe, which is obviously a huge deal.
They are actually an insurance company or a tech company that provides insurance companies.
They're providing the data. They're providing the data that allows, companies like Munich Re to be able to provide insurance products with a degree of certainty at both the underwriting and then at the claims appraisal side that was not possible before a company of the sophistication of Cloud to Street. But now that they're here, it rips all of the costs out of the underwriting and all of the costs out of the claims process. It totally alters the economics of the overall insurance process. So it's obviously a better deal for Munich Re, but it's also a much, 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 much better deal for the farmers because these insurance products can be provided at much, much, much lower cost while remaining economic for the insurance provider. With climate change, and climate change being water change, what you have is an unpredictability of the location and quantity of water. Too much, too little, whatever it is. And if you are an insurance underwriter and you are seeing this happen, you do not have a choice but to increase your premiums.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're looking at the farming market, these are, again, incredibly smart people operating in essentially a zero margin business. I mean, some years your margins are much better, but you've got to be able to, save up to be able to cushion the years where it's not great. Any change in their cost structure, whether it's the cost of water, the cost of insurance, right? The cost of inputs, which we're just going to see at the moment. Like, we're worried about like the cost of fertilizer and all other, chemicals that are being used in the food production process. I mean, you're talking, like, if you're lucky, you're talking about 30%. In some specialist chemicals, you're looking at 400%. This is not good, because what you're talking up is blowing up the income statements and balance sheets of the people that feed us. There's actually, just to follow this tangent a little bit, just given that we're here, there's kind of an interesting like thread of argument that often happens, which is, and you see this in Australia with the traders and the people who are looking to kind of do the really quite shitty thing, I think, of trying to corner water rights in the expectation of being able to sell them for a higher price later when people get desperate.
Yeah.
No, we implicitly take the other side of that trade. I want to make sure they lose that bet. If we can really get circularity going, if we can get efficiency going, if we can get crop resilience going, whatever it is, really the value of water rights should go down, because water should be in abundance. That's a big way to go. There's a long way to go until we've kind of achieved that, but that's very much the way in which we kind of look at it. But there is a kind of a viewpoint that, like, if you hold the water, then everybody else is going to be at your mercy. And it sort of reminds me of kind of like economics 101, when you're thinking about actually the elasticities of the curves and the price elasticity. Like, farmers will stop producing. These are incredibly, really, really sophisticated, economic agents. When the time is there for the field to go fallow, they're not going to, carry on producing the fruits and vegetables and meals that we need. No, they really are going to stop producing. And so if you think you're going to hold on to water and then sell it to farmers for some astronomical price, you're going to find out pretty quickly that there actually isn't a market for it. And so really, like, it's really important to respect the balance of the overall kind of economic ecosystem around water, because it behaves in all sorts of funny ways.
But even what, like we mentioned before, and obviously they invented the small consumer product that basically, turns air into water, right? But at scale, right, if these farmers spend, 50, 60, 70, 100 grand on tractors or equipment, right? It's a very expensive industry. I could see a world where they could just spend that on a massive water filtration system. That now I'm very ignorant to all this, right? But like, yeah. No, it could be. If we can make water from air, then there are ways where it feels like it becomes a little bit much more of an even playing field, where hopefully these farmers or whoever, right, are not at the beck and call of people who own water rights, or companies who just produce all the water bottles, and now that's $8 a water bottle now, right? Like that. See a world where that can happen. But if we could all sort of produce our own water, then that's an investment that a home should make, a business should make.
Absolutely. And I totally, completely agree. I mean, the like a lot of people within water laugh at atmospheric water generation just because it hasn't come down the cost curve yet. We saw that Source yesterday, led by Breakthrough Energy Ventures, but with participation from Microsoft and BlackRock and all the rest of it. They raised 130 million. They have these things called hydro panels. I think they've done an absolutely extraordinary job, particularly on the kind of the product side of it. And I think there's a very kind of interesting base there. But it's really important to get the costs right. And there's quite a lot of competition of people kind of coming in with the potential to have a very different kind of cost basis for the water that's provided. The only thing that we see, the reason we chose to go in via the consumer product route, is that with the large scale stuff, not a lot to choose between them, and that's good for the customer. There is going to be a winner there. We're just not quite sure who that's going to be, and it's very, 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 very difficult to pick who it's going to be in terms of the large scale providers of atmospheric water generation, because basically everything is more sophisticated than this, but you're kind of sticking a dehumidifier in or a bunch of dehumidifiers in a shipping container, and then sticking a pipe out the other end of it, and just using that water to whatever it is that you're doing. A lot of people in water are going to hurl tomatoes at my head, but I don't think that's too much of a desimplification. But your point is like absolutely well taken. And once these things come down the cost curve, there is a really, really interesting kind of fundamental shift that comes in, what happens if, on top of or even attached to your air conditioner, you have your atmospheric water generator.
Right.
That is plugged straight into the wall that helps, top up a system within your apartment. What happens if in the inside of every Rotoplas container in Mexico is an atmospheric water generator that just constantly drips, water into the systems that are ubiquitous, not only in Mexico, but all over, the preponderance of the world, basically. Like, what happens when you do have alternative, really, really widespread alternative sources, in addition to water recycling? You get a fundamentally different structure of the water sector, which can only be a good thing, because it comes back to this idea of resilience. Now, we haven't quite got there yet in the venture world, but we are absolutely on the edge of it, because for the last, few years, we're really starting to see what climate change really means. And it's horrifying, right? Resilience to that. It used to be a fight between mitigation and adaptation. And the adaptation people were sort of dispatched for being naysayers and like, you're defeatist and all the rest of it. It's all about mitigation. Yeah. No, it is it's super important to make sure that we're running as many experiments on mitigation as we absolutely can. And it's great. $50 billion went into climate tech last year. Awesome. Only about 400 million of that went into water. And it's not all about water in terms of adaptation. It's not all about water, but the hill I will absolutely die on is looking into about 60 to 70% of it is about water in terms of adapting to climate change. And you include sea level rise in that. Look, there's going to be an awful lot of poured concrete and all that kind of stuff to be able to do it, et cetera, et cetera. But where you pour that concrete, like the way in which you design those systems, how you're thinking about the hydrology, this is all the stuff that's kind of on our wheelhouse. And hopefully this is now a settled debate that we are going to need both. We're going to need both mitigation and adaptation if we're going to be able to provide our children with a future that's better than the one that we live in, which is the fundamental responsibility of any generation. And I think people are kind of waking up to that, and hopefully we can do a reasonable job of identifying the founders that can prove that there is a good amount of frankly money to be made in this, because money attracts talent, and money attracts more capital, and with more capital you can run more experiments, because sure as hell 400 million in the banner year, it was 5x the previous clean tech quote unquote boom from 06 to 11, which was only 10 billion. It was 5x the previous boom in 1 year. We're taking this seriously, and to some extent, our response is now, I think, is kind of a done deal. It's like a fait accompli, because you've got too many smart people running too many experiments, doing too many interesting things for us not to be able to dig ourselves out of this hole. But that is not true in water, and we need to make it true.
Is there conversations around subsidies for these sort of water products? Farmers get subsidies, oil companies get subsidies, Tesla got subsidies. Here in the Netherlands, they're subsidizing
watch out, Grant.
Electric bikes.
It pisses me off more than anything else in the whole world.
It just seems like an obvious thing. Like, if we can get clean water into people's homes, and it's right now, people buy TVs, right, at $1,500 or $800.
Yeah.
It would seem that, I don't know, it'd be reasonable to say, hey, and obviously it's a choice for a family and a household to say, hey, we're going to spend, $500, $800 on this, water sanitation sort of product, but we have clean water in our homes, fresh it. That's obviously something that families, but if there's, a subsidy of some sort where we seem to subsidize, it's just weird, like how some things get subsidized and some, but is there any conversations around that possibility? I know maybe not now, but in the future, to kind of initially get costs down, for people to understand the worth of having something like this.
Yeah, I'm pretty strident about this, and I'm sure it's much more nuanced. Everything always is, but really, if you look at the provision of subsidies, it's usually at the very least it's correlated with the degree to which the special interest groups have done a good job. We're talking about the US here, basically. It's also not true in Brussels, etc. The special interest groups have been able to go and quote unquote make their case, and by make their case is support a re-election campaign, and then as if by magic, there's an awful lot of, let's just call them market distortionary provisions that make the business models of a variety of different things a hell of a lot easier to do. In the case of solar, that is awesome. In the case of oil and gas, it is, in my opinion, much less awesome. It would be much nicer if they were forced to compete on a level playing field with, solar, wind, battery storage, all of this kind of stuff. So when you get to the water side of things, one of the things that's really always annoyed me is that water, I would like to see what happened if the water and wastewater unions walked out. I'm sure they're not allowed to by law. I'm not a lawyer by any means, but we don't punch our weight in water. We really are the fundamental molecule. We provide the fundamental molecule and the fundamental services that allow society to exist. Like, what happens when your toilet doesn't flush? Right? Stuff gets real really quickly when your tap comes on. Fast. And you can't trust it. And we just don't know how to go and, start being the 800-pound gorilla as a sector that we absolutely should be. I mean, even if you're just talking in terms of dollars and cents, like the ROI that the oil and gas crew get on what they spend on lobbying is, I just calculated, it's about 250x. I mean, it gets paid back in about just under 2 days or something completely ridiculous. Wow. In terms of the maintenance of the subsidies, in terms of what they spend every year to maintain those subsidies. Whereas water, the water majors kind of, just sort of ish kind of, and then we all pat ourselves on the back for doing a fly-in for the 2 days to go and have conversations with, senators and congressmen. And all of the senators and congressmen have forgotten about those conversations about 15 minutes before they finished. We have a bat to wield and we choose not to wield it. And that's partially because we're crap at telling our story, right? We're getting better, but we're still crap at it. And, if we're really talking about fundamentally changing the economics and really safeguarding the access to water, which in America is embarrassing in 2022, it really is. I mean, just looking at Catherine Flowers' work in the southeastern states, the inability of people to access basic sewage services in America in 2022 is absurd. But we haven't made that case. But on the other side of it, yes. I mean, in terms of things, especially around, there are great work that's being, done on, subsidies for all sorts of consumer related services to reduce individual footprints. I kind of hate that overall idea because it transfers the responsibility for what's going on in terms of the water and energy balance to the consumer rather than the people who actually use most of it, which is not the consumer. It was an ingenious idea by the energy industry in the 90s. Anyway, there is support. It's getting a bit better in the infrastructure bill, but it's all going to go to the centers of populations. And the people that lose out are going to be, as ever, the people who are least able to pay and the least able to deal with it. I mean, this is a fundamental issue of equity that we haven't sorted out yet. But really, I think step one is that, let's see what happens when actually when the water sector uses its full political power, because I think we would be able to make changes and make changes fast. We just, we've got to tell our story much, much better to the public. As I say, that is changing. But we need to be, if it's going to be a corrupt system, just go play the game, become a more important part of someone's re-election campaign than whatever.
Well, hey, I mean, if you yeah, exactly. At least it's a resource we all need to live and survive, right?
Yeah, I just think
it's a little bit different.
Stop pretending the game is anything other than it is and go play it.
Well, this is my next. I want to end on these two questions. The first would be around, you mentioned decentralized infrastructure before. Can you touch on that a little bit more and kind of what that means specifically to water?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, really what you're talking about is that at the moment, you kind of have a centralized drinking water treatment plant, then you have a bunch of pipes that takes it out to houses, and then there's a whole bunch of pipes to take it back to a wastewater treatment plant, and either the treated water is then passed back to the drinking water plant or it's discharged into either surface water or aquifers or whatever it might be. That's the sort of basic structure of the provision of water at the consumer and, frankly, a lot of the industrial scale. Water's really heavy and it costs a lot to pump, and a lot of the pipes are broken. Even in California, you're looking at about 18 to 20% leakage rate. So you treat the water and then you put it into a pipe, and only 80% of the water that you've treated at vast expense and vast energy and chemical expense, as not to mention the expertise of the people who are running those plants, a fifth of that, 1 in every 5 gallons just kind of falls out the pipe into the world. And that goes up to kind of a really amazing kind of leakage rates of kind of 50% in other cities. And it's kind of a crazy situation. Like as you're looking at new communities, and I'll bring sort of two examples. Firstly, on a community basis, like wouldn't it make a lot more sense if you had like a micro drinking water plant and a micro wastewater plant? So you would have to pump this stuff less far. The pipes would be much easier to maintain. The energy draw would be much less, and people would be much closer to these vital services, so they would appreciate it much more. I mean, you can go into all of it. You can go into all of the sort of the issues around it, but that's kind of like the fundamental idea. Then you have this at the individual household level. What happens if you were able to isolate the water that's like not fecally contaminated, so anything that comes from the washing machines or the sinks or the the water that's running off in the garden or like whatever it is, and put that around a circular loop? There is some really interesting stuff going on. And then you have companies like Epic Clean Tech, which is starting in California, which is, according to, SFPUC or under the new regulations, every high-rise building, I forget what the threshold is, has to have a black water treatment system in the basement that allows you to treat that water on site. Sorry, purple pipe. No, black water is for everything over a square block in Mumbai, or everything up to including a square block in Mumbai. Now it has to have its own interior treatment system. It has to be able to be fundamentally off-grid in terms of wastewater treatment. In San Francisco, what Epic Clean Tech are doing, they treat all of the solids. Some of it is discharged to the sewer, but a lot of the almost all of the water divided between what is called gray, which is non-fecally contaminated, and then fecally contaminated is then recycled through the building. And they have, I believe, 5 or 7 deployments now in LA and in San Francisco. And this is just how buildings will be built in the future, is that they are going to, all high rises will have the capacity to be able to do their own treatment on site. And then in terms of the industrial side of things, being able to have a far, far more effective water treatment system that minimizes the amount of water that's being put out into the sewer or being trucked away, and then pushing that water round and round, is basically just anything that doesn't hit a centralized treatment plant. So the stuff that you see by the side of the world with the side of the road with those, large circles, or when you're flying overhead with the kind of like those arms reaching into the center, you've all kind of seen them. Those, they really, really big. Now they really benefit from economies of scale. And so what you need to do is to get to kind of delivered cost parity. Well, not necessarily delivered cost parity, because often it's kind of a blend of these things. And there are lots and lots of tailwinds in that. One of the stealth taxes, especially for businesses, has been like the rapid increase in sewerage costs. So it's rather than increasing the cost of the water that comes in the front, they did increase the cost of taking the water way out the back in order to make their kind of economics make sense. And that creates the economic conditions for people who can reduce the amount of water that you need to put into the sewer, like Epic Clean Tech and others, to be able to come in and have this make sense on a unit economic basis. And so there's a huge amount of effort being put into it. And it's tremendously exciting because a decentralized future is where it's going. The question, as always, is how fast.
Last question. Thank you for your time so much. I think going back to sort of the lobbying efforts, right, and how oil and a bunch of other sort of private industries can do that, is that because it was never like government run at any point, right? Where it's almost like, paying for software, and it's been free for so long. It's like, a lot of people, YouTube's free, so they do that. Not many people pay for YouTube, right? Because water has been a government provided resource for so long, do you think that hampers it in that it's sort of just like you say, it's sort of an archaic model for something that's so important?
Yeah.
It's a scary way to say this, because when you say it, I think a lot of negative antlers will go up, and I agree, I am one of them. But I believe in founders so much, and I believe in the ability for companies to do good. They're always going to be bad companies, right? Like it's impossible to not, right? Just human nature of it.
Yeah.
But the idea of sort of not necessarily like a privatization of water, but the ability for the government to grant private companies, just like the government doesn't build planes and rockets and tanks, right? We pay private businesses to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Is that perhaps would that be beneficial to the industry or the sector, is to get the private involved, more of a private public partnership
there are all sorts of privately held companies that will do design build, operate, and design, build, operate, and then sometimes they'll transfer it, sometimes they won't. There are a lot of these models out there, and there are private companies that, American Water being one of them, Aqua America, Suez, etc., that operate a lot of these systems, and they make money in the same way that other utilities are, which is basically they're allowed to earn a return on the capital that they invest. Essentially, that's how they do it. They obviously take in rates from the people to whom they provide their services, but they have a kind of a cap rate that they're allowed to provide. So it's fundamentally predicated on the way in which they maintain their services. It works really well. There is a fundamental limiting factor here.
Right.
So in the UK, they did this, and
because they only provide a service, not necessarily a product.
Right. And so, yeah, exactly. So what they're providing is adequate services for sewerage and water out of the delivered water out of the drinking water plant. So they'll obviously oversee it, but what's being installed is it's not like white labeled it's not like a product of the city of Oakland. They're going to be using a Xylem stack or a Suez stack or an Evoqua stack or like whatever it is, or a combination of all of the above. And so it's not really it's not about the full privatization, because some of the best water utilities are public entities, right? Yep. It's not like all of the public entities are a basket case and all of the private entities are like awesome toast. And then actually, like what you saw in the UK was that they basically dividended out all of the surplus and then didn't actually invest anywhere near as much as they, I suppose, should have done. It's a value judgment, but should have done in the actual services, because they decided that was a better economic outcome for their shareholders, because that's what they're required to do by law, is act in the best financial interest of their shareholders. That's a whole different kettle of fish. But really, I think like where you started that question was kind of an interesting one, and hopefully a good note to end on is kind of this idea of the value of water. Water's quite tricky because people are like, yeah, but how much is water actually worth? And you come up to the conclusion that actually the economic value of water is total, because if you don't have water, you don't have operations. And so nobody likes that answer. So the question is, so it really becomes like, what's the value of water? The value of water is what, the finance professionals in XYZ organization is kind of willing to pay for it while maintaining, your particular operation as being economic, essentially. What you are seeing is an increasing willingness to pay for water, both on the consumer side and on the company side of things, because there is an appreciation that we are in a pretty tricky place. That's, especially true in the southwestern states in the US, but it's true really all over the world. But this is a massive equity issue, just because like water itself is a regressive tax. If you stick up the price of water, it disproportionately impacts those least able to pay, because it is a flat tax, because everybody needs it.
Yep.
The city of Philadelphia and various others, I've done some really interesting stuff on kind of, sliding scale, or it's the best way to think about it is basically means tested pricing. But the perception of the value of water and the value of water correlation, various others have done a really, really good job around this. It really is kind of the whole ball game, because if we did actually price water according to utility, God knows where we'd end up, but it would be awfully expensive.
Well, that's what I'm saying.
It would be awfully expensive. It just needs to be slightly more expensive, especially for those most able to pay, right? It needs to be commercially slightly more expensive. And in times of inflation, that's like it's really tough, but we're going to have some really, really hard trade-offs. But, the perception of the value of water is crucial.
That was kind of what I was trying to get to. It was a bad way of framing the question by me, because like we all pay a water bill, right? Yep. It's not like it's just
we just don't care about it. Nobody knows how much it is, right?
Exactly.
We know how much we pay for our cell phone. We have no idea how much we pay for water.
But we're still paying for water. I guess the issue is that if it's bad, there's not another alternative, right? It's just you still have to pay even for inadequate sort of water systems or
literally poisons,
right? Or exactly. Right? So I guess my point was that at that level, right, just let the marketplace, featureize it, do some certain things, whatever it may be. You're already paying it anyway, right? And it's just like, well, what if there was a sort of open market to provide the services? That could be interesting, because if a person is not still paying that $50-$100 a month for water from the government,
this is where like recycling atmospheric water generation and all the rest of it, like comes in at the consumer side of things anyway, is that once it gets, expensive enough, what you have then is a monthly payment from a household where you can compare the value of, a box that creates water on the countertop or in the garden or whatever it is, or a recycling system that allows you to, reuse what you do for your washing up as what you water the garden with, or like whatever it is. Like as prices climb, we're already seeing exactly what you're talking about, which is the economic conditions has been one of the tailwinds against which we've started this fund, right? Is that like actually the investment in consumer products, but also like the industrial products that kind of get to the same thing. Like the business case is now, it's becoming a line item that people care about, not only in terms of like a risk, what happens if we run out of water, but also like, Jesus Christ, is that my water bill? Like we're getting to that point.
Right.
And that's great. That's great for founders, because people are now asking themselves some serious questions.
Yeah. I mean, if you have to pay for it, you might as well get what you pay for at some level, right? That just makes sense.
Yep. Exactly.
All right. Well,
market economics.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Tom. Like I know we went long on this one, but I super appreciate your time.
No, huge pleasure.
Best of luck with the fund, man.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. It's been a huge pleasure. I love this. I love your show. So it's really is a great privilege to be on. Thank you. Thank you so much for having me on to talk at slight length about the fundamental molecules. Sorry if I was slightly verbose. As you can probably tell, I love this stuff. But yeah, thank you so much.